The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. My name is Reginald, and I'm with the Arizona Department of Housing. I will be your facilitator for this morning's webinar presentation of the Pathway to Purchase Down Payment Assistance Relaunch Training. Hopefully, some of you have had an opportunity to participate in a previous training, but if not, that's okay. This first time hopefully will be good for you. And this recording will be posted to our website so that you and others can access it at any time in the future to help you better understand how to work the program. We show about 10:01, so I'm going to give it a little bit of time, give some others an opportunity to log in. We had about 500 people register. And I think most of them have logged in. While we kind of wait, I'm going to look at some of the questions. One says, is there or there is no audio? There is no audio because with 500 people, it's hard to control the background noise. Therefore, hopefully, you can hear through your computer in terms of the sound of the presentation. However, you can't ask questions other than in writing. So if you put that in the checkbox, that'll take care of that. I'm going to take a look at some of these. Is there a call-in number? I can't hear you. No, there is not a call-in number because it is being recorded. You need to be able to receive the sound through your computer. Hi, this is Steve. I won't say your last name. I'm not able to get audio. Is there a phone number to call in? No. Looks like we'll have a couple of those. Let me just take a quick peek at some of these while we still wait for others to log in. And I'm going to pause the recording before we get started, just as we clean up these other messages. David Wilsey will be joining me, so he'll kind of take a look at some of the messages just as we go through the presentation to ensure that we answer all the questions. Well, again, good morning. My name is Reginald. I'm with the Arizona Department of Housing, and David Wilsey, also with the Department of Housing, is here with me. He'll help to manage the questions that come through the question box as I walk through the presentation. The presentation is being recorded. So at the completion of the presentation, it will be posted on the Down Payment Assistance website under the training link. We will go through the site that will kind of draw your attention to all the key places and information there that should prove beneficial to you in the future. Like any good instructor or facilitator, I'm going to point out to you the major things you want to take note of or need to take note of and understand in order to effectively work this program. We're going to walk through what I like to call the 5 phases to funding plus 1 to be done. So it will be 5 phases to funding plus 1 to be done. I will speak to you clearly about each phase and what's to be accomplished in that phase as succinctly as possible, hopefully to help you to understand at a high level how to effectively work it. And then we all know no job is done until the paperwork is done. And so you have to get into the details and ensure that you execute that high level understanding appropriately in order to effectively facilitate the transaction. All right, good deal. So what you see here on the web, on the screen is the Department of Housing's webpage. The program and all program information is accessible via the department's primary webpage. You just want to come here to the program home buyer box. You see the link for Pathway to Purchase, and you would click on that, and it will take you here to the DPA site page. The DPA site page contains all the information you or a consumer would need or should need in order to understand the program and how to properly access it. Here you get an overview of the down payment assistance. It is much like it was before with a few significant adjustments, and we'll speak to those in 1 or 2 minor adjustments, and we will get to those as well. So let me just see here. You're pointing. Yeah, I can hear every other word.
And it's cutting in and out.
And it's cutting in and out. That's interesting. My audio cue indicates that it's picking up accurately. Let me see here. on the computer. It'll take a moment. Yeah, so that's it. I don't know. Hopefully it'll improve. I got a couple other people who said, I hear you just fine. So with that in mind, and that was on the last one I just did it, hopefully that's better. And a couple more says it's clear. Beautiful. Okay, we'll resume from here. As I mentioned, there are a few major adjustments and a few minor adjustments. I'll bring those to your attention as well as we walk through the 5 phases to funding plus 1 to be done. As I was saying, here on the landing page of the Down Payment Assistance for Pathway to Purchase is an overview of the program. Again, just going to point out some quick things. You know, the income limit has not changed from before, and the purchase price limit has not changed from before. The down payment assistance has not changed from before. 10% of the purchase price up to $20,000. If by chance the purchase price is greater than the fair market value, the 10% is based on the lesser of the two, which is consistent with standard lending practices. But in the event that you have a question or concern in that area, we want to speak to that. And there have been some instances procedurally where we've made a change. You'll see that we've issued a commitment for assistance based on the purchase price only to have the appraised value come in less later. I want to point out 2 things to you at this point about that in the event that I forget to do so later. The commitment letter that we issue says that the consumer is approved for a reservation up to. So it's up to like the maximum of $20,000. So if the purchase price came in less and the DPA amount would be less based on that purchase price, we do not reissue a commitment when you notify us that the appraised value is less and therefore either the purchase price is being reduced or the assistance is definitely being reduced based upon the lesser of the two. We will reduce the amount of the DPA assistance on the closing documents to reflect the 10% of the lesser of the two numbers. Hopefully that made sense. We'll get a chance probably to speak to that again as we get into the down payment assistance docs being prepared. But for now, draw your attention back here. We've covered the income limit. We spoke briefly about the purchase price limit, the down payment assistance, which was no change. The major change is the eligible areas or the target zip codes, if you will. We did change that. It is 26 cities, 12 cities and 26 zip codes. Here are the 12 cities. And when you get into looking at the specific zip codes, you'll see over here on the links to the right, target areas eligible. You can click on that and it will give you by county first, then city, and then zip code. So as you see, there are various counties that are eligible for the assistance, various cities within those counties, and then specific zip codes within those cities. All eligible properties must be in an eligible county, in an eligible city, within the eligible zip code in order to be eligible for assistance. That's something you and the consumers definitely want to take note of. It's really important there. Participating lenders, for the most part, are all the IDA lenders. I want to stress something to you here, right? So there's a list or a link that a consumer can access to discover participating lenders. However, because this program is web-based and lender-driven, very few consumers come to the program then looking for a lender. Most of them find a lender who bring them to the program, right? And something I want to make sure that you take note of when we talk about that participating lender list, and you see the link here for that. This is a list of the vast majority of lenders who participate in either the AZIDA Home Plus program or the Pima County Tucson IDA Home Buyer Solution program. Both of those IDAs, and you will see information regarding those IDAs here on the website under the links, provide the underlying first mortgage for the down payment assistance program. It is extremely important that you make note of the fact that it is a combination transaction. The first lender is you, the originating lender. selling that product under the participating IDA. When inside Pima County, you have a choice between the AZ IDA, because they operate inside Pima County, and the Pima Tucson IDA, because they operate exclusively inside Pima County. As you probably are well aware, their pricing and their process differ. Therefore, you as the originating lender will determine which IDA works best for you and the client on that individual transaction. When you are outside of Pima County, you are restricted to the AZ IDA, because that's the only option outside of Pima County. Okay, now we're going to get a little bit into the meat of the transaction. Again, before I go there, I want to stress one thing. What we are covering during this presentation and or training is the process of facilitating a pathway to purchase DPA transaction. We are not covering lending, right? There are just some things we take for granted that you understand. As I mentioned, when the appraisal comes in less than the purchase price, the DPA amount is reduced because it's based on the lesser of the two. That's basic lending. If you have lending questions or concerns, I'd encourage you to go back to your underwriters, your organization for that. We're talking about the process of P2P. And remember, when you have questions regarding the underlying first, we encourage you to contact the participating IDA. And again, there are links here for lender support for each one of them, just like it is for us. There are links here for accessing their site page to register the first mortgage, just like it is for us. And then if you need a participation addendum, those are posted here as well. But we think at this point we have most participating lenders have executed the addendum. All right, good. That being said, a major shift in the process from before. You want to ensure you address the DPA loan, which is the second, first. And the reason you want to address that first is because there's another shift in the process from before, if you're familiar with that. We have a monthly allocation of $1.5 million for down payment assistance. This program relaunched in August initially, and we got to 3 days left in the month before that allocation was expended. In September, we got about a week and a half into the month before that allocation was expended. We're going to look at production for October, right? Then we'd have a 90-day history to try and establish a trend, because it's hard to say how many of those transactions are converting from existing transactions versus how many are new originations. But we fully anticipate, by mid-month, definitely the third week of the month, that monthly allocation will be expended. With that in mind, you are encouraged to get your reservation of commitment for those funds as soon as possible. And now we go into phase one of the 5 phases to funding plus 1 to be done. You want to come to the registration page. You see, I just clicked that registration link. I would come to the same site like you. I'm going to log in. We're going to kind of walk through that information so we see it. And you want to register your transaction. In registering your transaction, you have to do a number of things first. I have a test case in here that I'm going to walk you through so you will be able to see it. This test case has all sample information, so it's no individual's private information. When you register your case, phase 1, you're doing 2 things: completing this registration and generating this documentation. And that's extremely important, because the documents that you see or will see come up on the screen are the application documents that the consumer must sign in order for you to move to phase 2. But let's be really clear. The primary 2 objectives of phase 1 is case registration, so you would go through the import, and documentation creation for signing. And you see the documents. So it's going to have, right, the counseling agency, the address. The consumer needs to sign right below their name here and date the document. in order to give you the authorization, us the authorization that we need in order to get the transaction back. I was only getting one there. I want to take a quick look at that. We'll go through these. The thing you want to make sure of when you're looking at those documents and you see the funds request form here, everything required to be populated on this form is populated based upon you properly completing the case registration. And we'll look at those pages. I'll show you the job aid that will help you refer back to that. Also the step-by-step, which covers at a high level how I'm giving you these phases. Phase 1 encompasses steps 1 and 2 of the step-by-step process. Make note of that. Phase 1, case registration, documentation creation for signatures, encompasses steps numbers 1 and 2 of the step-by-step process. As I said, you see the forms here. You, the originating lender, are to sign this form and to date it and to print your name and title. And it is a part of the requirement in order to get to the reservation request. You see the Dodd-Frank form. The consumer is to sign and date this form. And notice they must indicate by checking the proper box that they have not been convicted of a felony involving money laundering, fraud, larceny, tax evasion. If they have, they are not eligible for assistance under the program. You see the third-party authorization, we touched on that. This is the initial TIL for the program. I want to mention something about the initial TIL, right? Remember, I stated it's a combination transaction. You're the originating lender on the first. You're generating your LE and CD in relationship to that, and you're reflecting on that the DPA second, which is going to cause the transaction to reconcile in terms of first mortgage, second mortgage, closing costs. However, you are not disclosing the second because you're not the lender for the second. We are the lender for the second, and we disclose via the initial TIL, and there's a final TIL. It's extremely important that you get two things really right about this TIL. One, that the consumer does not alter this date, which is generated here. When you read the populated information, it's saying that date is reflective of the date the TIL was prepared, not the date the TIL was signed. So if you explain that to the consumer, they should have no issue signing on the 20th of September, for example, when it's dated the 24th of August, because you're saying it's when it was prepared, not when you signed it. The second thing, the only allowable fee in relationship to the DPA loan is a recording fee for the second. And we'll touch on this a little bit as well when we get into the other phase of docking and funding the deal. But when you open escrow based on your purchase and sale agreement, you should ensure that they understand it's a combination transaction. You should ask them if there's a separate recording fee for that DPA second. If they say it is, you want to reflect that fee here because it reduces that amount from the actual DPA assistance and then puts the difference here, which goes to title. That's the only significant thing. We don't expect that fee to ever be more than $100, whether that's a handling fee, if you will, or the actual recording fee. And this is just an initial disclosure statement. You see here, we've just put in a form to indicate the homebuyer education certificate, which is required that the consumer must do. That's another shift in our process. We know historically lenders have waited until near closing time to have the consumer do that because you will need that certificate early in the process now in order to request a reservation. You want to encourage your consumers to complete that sooner than later. I mean, technically, it's best that they complete it before they sign a purchase and sale agreement. But either way, if not, they need to complete it shortly thereafter. You see an indication of the loan prospector certification or the LP findings. That's required in order for you to request a certification. Underwriting qualifying income calculation. I'm going to mention something here as I pause. This is not the income as calculated by the underwriter. This is the income as calculated by the originator or processor for submission to the underwriter. We need to see, like you need to see, that you've determined this consumer is eligible based on income. something you would have done before you issued a pre-qual letter for the realtor to take them out. And then you see we indicate a copy of the purchase and sale agreement, all addendums. And this is the DPA declaration of eligibility form that the consumer would sign. Again, populates all the information as you properly input it in the system. They need to indicate whether or not they've previously received Save Our Home AZ assistance, because if they have, they're not eligible for the assistance a second time. That could be down payment assistance previously under Pathway to Purchase, or it could be loss mitigation assistance previously under Save Our Home AZ. The source of the funding for each of those programs is the Hardest Hit Fund program, which is why an applicant is not eligible for a second bite at the apple, if you will. I'm going to pause. What are you reading there, David?
Okay, we got a couple questions. One is someone wanted to know the time frame for the funds reservation to delivery, and that would be 45 days.
Yes. Once we issue a commitment, the commitment is for a 45-day period. That is ample time to cover your ability to commit and deliver on the first mortgage. So we have it bracketed, and therefore it should never produce an issue for you. And since we changed the process to get the DPA commitment up front, that's why we give that reservation commitment and the 45-day time period. And you will see that when I show you where we input that into the system as well. In the event that you need it for your underwriting. What else you got there, David?
Does a transaction need to be registered with e-housing before requesting a funds reservation for P2P?
Excellent question. No, it does not. Remember, it's a reverse order. The first thing you need to do is tend to the second mortgage. The first thing you need to do is attend to the second mortgage. Once you get that commitment of the reservation funds for the second mortgage, then you move on to handling all the things you need to do in terms of the first mortgage. All right, I'm going to pick up our pace a little bit here. This is the household composition sheet. An important thing about this sheet, again, consumer must answer the question about whether or not they've previously received Save Our Home assistance, right? There are multiple checks and balances to deter and detect, and most importantly, prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. If the applicant has income, right, that income will populate here. If they own other real estate, they should indicate that. I think you know or should know another significant change in the program this time from before is they cannot own any other residential real estate and be eligible for down payment assistance. If they're selling and buying, that's acceptable, right? That's a sequential transaction. They must close and sell first before they close and buy. However, if they're retaining residential real estate, they're not eligible for down payment assistance. Other household members who are not on the loan must still be listed here, and their income must be listed, and whether or not they own real estate must be listed. A lot of that information goes into our data collection and gathering as we analyze who's actually assisted by our program, not just individually, but collectively. Therefore, you want to ensure you properly guide the applicant in completing all of that information. Great. All right, so we're going to jump off of that. Now, at that point, remember, we talked phase one. You would have created the case, you would have generated the docs, and the consumer signs those docs. Now you move to phase two. And at phase two, you're going to primarily request your reservation. And in order to do so, you must upload the documents. You see here a reflection of these documents that have been uploaded into the system. The white pages, if you will, are the template documents that are there that you generate. When you upload the signed documents, you will note that they're here with the date of the upload on the documents, and that's how you know what you got, which is what we were taking a look at. An important thing about those signed documents, sometimes electronic signatures, depending on how they're generated, may or may not reflect when you look at the documents. I mentioned to you earlier that funds request form, which requires your signature as a lender. You want to review these documents, just like we did now, before you submit this case to us for a reservation, so that if they're not legible for whatever reason, or they're missing a signature, or they're missing information, that you correct that before you submit it. Because every incomplete or inaccurate submission we receive, we reject. And that rejection does not get you a reservation of funds. We've had people who've resubmitted after they've been rejected, only to discover the funds have been all committed, and now they're caught between a rock and a hard space. Now, generally, if you're working it properly, you're early on in the process, and there's ample time to get to the next month, get a commitment, and close the transaction. However, you want to keep in mind, at the end of the program, there will be no next month. So the failure to provide a proper submission initially that results in a rejection may result in the missing out on the opportunity. So you want to focus on the details, and you want to get those right the first time. All right, so you've downloaded the docs in phase one, you've generated them because you've registered the case in phase one. You move to phase two, you're now uploading the signed docs, you've reviewed those signed docs, and you're going to transmit this case to ADOH, right? And everything from your loan origination system that you import into this system, you can see. So we're just going to walk real quick through the pages that you would take a look at, right? You get your overview, it's going to generate a case, it's going to tell you who you are as a lender, and it's going to give you a submission date of that. You go to the property, this is the subject property being purchased, not the consumer's residence address. If you don't have an appraisal, a lot of people will say that early on, what am I supposed to do with the appraised value? You should input it as the purchase price. We know it might be subject to change and you'll have to address that, but you can't do an import without an appraised value on there. And then the system will pick up the number of household members based on the number of borrowers, not the true number of household members, which is why that household composition sheet that we looked at won't pick up 4 or 5 dependents or a spouse if that spouse is not a borrower. Then the mortgage information will be the DPA first mortgage, right? And so if you're with the IDA in Tucson, it's going to reflect their rate. If you're with the AZ IDA, it's going to reflect their rate. But this is you, the originating lender. And remember, all this information is hypothetical because it's an example, it's not the actual. You should notice, and this has an incorrect, your import should be a Freddie Mac transaction because the underlying first in conjunction with these transactions are to be the Freddie Mac Advantage product only. We had one before when it was the Fannie Mae, which is why it has that information. Delinquency is non-relevant. The borrower will show you each consumer participating in the transaction. You can click on the link and then you'll see the detail of their information. Really important because this is right how we cross-reference some of the information. The last 4 of their social is going to appear on your whole LP findings. Therefore, we know if there's an error, that information needs to be accurate and complete in there. Hardship under these will just say down payment assistance, no big deal. And then the financial information it picks up based on your financial import there.
Go back to financial.
Yes.
Okay. A lot of times they'll break it out. Okay. If there's not a number in here, it'll show up as 0.
Right.
Okay. On our form. And so make sure you've got something in the gross income.
All right.
Totals.
Hopefully you took note of that. And typically it'll just import on the gross. But we're talking about, and David was pointing out, an issue we've had with incomplete documents. If there is no gross income, then it won't show up on the down payment assistance request form. And again, that's where I was taking you back. If you're reviewing the form properly, then you're going to have an opportunity to know whether or not you properly completed the information because we're scrolling through. You'll see income here. If you don't see an income here, you know the system's not properly completed. And so you want to go back to the system, recreate the document, have the consumer sign the document. We're looking now at the down payment assistance is here, the DPA, and it is the amount that you would input into the system for the second mortgage. Remember, this is a second mortgage. As I mentioned, it's a combination transaction. This second mortgage is a 5-year lien, which does not incrementally decline over time. I like to say it's all or nothing at the end of time. Be sure the consumers understand that. Oftentimes later on when they're trying to sell, they'll say that wasn't explained. But the promissory note and the deed of trust explains that as well. But we just want to do our best to ensure people know what they're doing before they do it. And then you will see the documents here, as we've indicated, that you would have uploaded into the system. right? The doc data screen, this is an important tab. This is the information that's on that funds request form. We've had a number of people previously use this banking information. I'm going to say one more time, this is merely an example. All of the information input in the system should be actual, accurate information reflective of the transaction you're working on. So the wiring information would be for the title company that you're currently working with. The escrow number is the escrow number for the title company. When you look at the job aid, and we're going to take a quick peek at that, all of these pertinent areas have a red box around them, and then they have populated information, which is just to depict for you where information is required. All right. And then you would simply go to update. And when you're updating this status, in order to complete phase 2, which is all about step number 3 in the step-by-step, you would change the case from lender review status to pending DPA. When you select pending DPA and you see it like that, it will change the case status, as you see right here, from lender review to pending DPA. The completion of that is the completion of the submission to receive a reservation. It is not a reservation. Remember, you must still receive an acknowledgement from us that the case has been approved, a reservation has been made, and when that happens, we will also upload a commitment form for that reservation into the system that you would be able to see here, and it would be our approval. David was going to point out something.
Here we got a couple questions. It says, so children need to be listed on the household composition form.
Yes.
That's correct. And so no one on the loan can own a home.
That is correct as well. Someone not on the loan can own a home, but no one on the loan can own a home. And another key point about people on the loan, right? If their income is being used to qualify, they must be on the loan. If they're on the loan, they must be on the deed. Again, you may know from experience, sometimes a person can be on the deed and not on the loan. That is not the case with these transactions. It is all or nothing. If you're on the note, you're on the deed. If you're on the deed, you're on the note. If you're not on both, you're not on any. All or nothing. Great question. What else you got there, David?
It says, to clarify, a second mortgage is a 5-year lien that is due in full at the end of the 5 years?
No, the second mortgage is a 5-year lien that is due in full anytime prior to the end of the 5 years. At the completion of the 5 years, the lien is considered satisfied and therefore released. The significance of that is some people might go 4 years and 10 months and think because they're selling at that point, the lien payoff will be less than the original amount, and it won't because there is no incremental decline. It is all or nothing until the completion of the 5 years. Good deal. All right, now back to where we were. We've completed phase 1, which involves steps 1 and 2 of the step-by-step, case registration, documentation, creation. We completed phase 2, which involves step number 3 of the step-by-step, the reservation request. You upload the signed documents, you submit the case to ADOH, and before you do that, you confirm that those documents are legible. And now we're going to talk just briefly about phase 4. And phase 4 is when we review what you submitted in order to determine the acceptability of it. And we do the exact same thing that we discussed. We go through the case, the information in the system to ensure it's properly created because that captures data that we need for reporting. And we review the case documentation that you submitted because that's required for the file. No job is done until the paperwork is done. If we review this information and it's all acceptable, and we review the web online information and it's acceptable, and we confirm the property is an existing property. Remember, new construction is not eligible. Spec homes are not eligible. Manufactured homes are not eligible. It must be existing residential properties 1 to 4 unit for primary residence purposes, then we will issue a commitment of funds. And as I mentioned earlier, it will say the consumer's approved up to X amount. Therefore, if the appraisal comes in and it's less, you know you will need to notify us that the assistance amount needs to be reduced because the appraisal came in less. I'm going to pause again and see what David's got. What you looking at?
We got a question here about are timeshares considered home ownership?
That's a great question, and I would refer you to the participating IDA because the first mortgage, being that HFA, Freddie Mac HFA Advantage product, they would make that determination, not us. So contact them, see what they say, depending on what they tell you, proceed accordingly. All right. We got through steps number 1, steps number 2, or phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Now we're moving into phase 4. And just so you know, I want to give you an overview of the time that this should take from that phase 1 to that phase 3 that we talked about. Ideally, you're talking about 72 hours. Because when you get a purchase and sell agreement for the consumer, you should generate the documents in phase 1 for them to sign and register the case. As soon as they return that, even if you call that 24 hours, you should complete phase 2 where you upload those signed documents, complete that funds request form, and submit that case to us. Now we're 48 hours in, right? And at the short side, maybe 72 hours, phase 3 is where we review that case. When you submit a case to us for a request of a reservation, everything received prior to 4 p.m. today is reviewed and responded to the next day. Everything received after 4 p.m. today is considered a next day submission. Keep that in mind because when we get to the funding of the transaction at closing, there's another 48-hour wait and the time frame is the same. And so when you understand it, you don't get caught up late trying to fund a deal because you didn't properly work the process. Everything submitted today prior to 4 is reviewed and responded to the next business day. Everything submitted today after 4 is considered a next business day submission. Now, we're back to phase 3 where we've completed our review. We issue you that reservation or commitment of funds. This is when typically, right, 72 hours in, you're contacting title if you haven't already, and you're making sure that they understand it's a combination transaction. You're making sure that when you order homeowners insurance on this transaction and get your lost payee, that you're referencing the DPA second and ensuring that that's properly noted, right? So that when you go to closing, there are no hiccups. Extremely important. Because we're now moving into phase 4, which encompasses step number 5. On phase 4, we're sending instructions to title and we're sending the closing docs to title. We're informing title that our docs are only date sensitive to the month. So the sooner we get docs there, the longer they have to use those docs. And that's why we're saying, right, you make that request as soon as you get that purchase and sell agreement, then probably within 4 or 5 days, the DPA docs are at title. You have the balance of the month to sign that transaction. Some people have asked questions and struggled with the concept that when you're completing this funds request that you see here, that it asks for a signing date and a disbursement date. And the thing I like to share when I get that question is when effectively facilitating any transaction, you should begin with the end in mind. Based on the purchase and sell agreement, you know when it's to close escrow, right? So if it's to close escrow, for example, on the 30th, the signing date should not be the 30th because it's going to take 48 hours from the time title provides us a copy of the signed closing package to deliver the wire. So, for example, when you look here, it says, all right, date request is the 24th, signing date is the 30th, disbursement date is the 23rd. Those numbers don't even make sense. But again, we wouldn't reject it based on that. We would simply say, you should know how it flows. If you're submitting on the 24th, for example, you got 48 hours before docs would be there. So you could not sign, we're going to discount any weekends, before the 26th. If you were signing on the 26th, for example, and title returned to us, and we'll look at that part, the closing package on the 26th, you have 48 hours before funds will be there to disperse. Therefore, it could not disperse prior to the 28th. So you're looking at least at 2 days separation of each of these numbers when you properly understand the flow. If anything goes wrong, you've just added time. That's why you want to stay ahead of the curve. So remember, the request should be well before you're looking to sign, but no less than 2 days before you're looking to sign. The signing should be well before you're looking to fund, but no less than 2 days before you're looking to fund. And if you have that right understanding and execution, all shall go well. What do you got, David?
I've got a couple here. It says, are non-occupying cosigners allowed?
No. And the underlying first mortgage does not allow it, which is a part of why we use that Freddie Mac transaction. No non-occupying co-borrowers.
It says September funds are depleted. Will funds be replenished for October?
Yes, there is an allocation for each month that will take place, right? Because that's just scheduled out. What will happen if we encounter a month that the full allocation is not expended, it will extend the time. We will not increase the monthly allocation. So at this point, there's no extension because all of the allocation from August went out, all the allocation from September is out. We'll see what October looks like. All right. Now, just to draw our attention back to where we were through phase 1, which encompassed steps 1 and 2 of the step-by-step. We completed phase 2, which encompasses step number 3 of the step-by-step. We've completed phase 3, which encompasses step number 4 of the step-by-step. We just discussed phase number 4, which encompasses step number 5 of the step-by-step. That's where we send instructions and docs to title. Now we're at phase 5 to funding, and that encompasses steps number 6 and 7 of the step-by-step. It's extremely important, right? We mentioned earlier, title knows that there's a first and a second. Title knows that they got to return our documents to our web portal. When you come to our website, and this information is in our closing package for the title company that says, okay, you got to send ADOH their documents in the portal, they would come here and locate the Pathway to Purchase portal. This portal will allow them, as you see, to simply upload, doesn't require any passwords, upload the closing package according to the escrow instructions, complete the required information as indicated by the red asterisk, and hit submit. We still didn't change this number here to transaction number because we know they won't have the e-housing number. It's not an e-housing number. It really should be our case number. We'll double check that to get that submitted. But based on title completing these actions in phase number 5, they're requesting the wire. And it's important, right? The escrow instructions, which you would have seen at the time that they sent out, that they see that they follow those instructions completely because it asks for some information associated with the first that we're required to verify, as well as all the documentation provided for the second. And when title remits that to our portal, again, by 4 p.m. today, is reviewed and responded to by tomorrow, which will give you the next day for the wire. That's your 48 hours. If submitted after 4 p.m. today, that is considered a next day submission, will be reviewed tomorrow, and you have 48 hours from that time before you get that wire. Extremely important. We've had the ability thus far to adhere to these time schedules without, incident. However, when it doesn't go according to plan, we have limited ability to try and help make up for it. Even errors on the part of our bank. We had a wire or two one day that the bank didn't send. And so we addressed that by having them give us confirmation at the close of each day of every wire process. But once tomorrow comes, there's nothing I can do to get that wire there the next day if it hadn't been ordered already. So that's extremely important. And that's why you want to ensure to stress to your title company when you first open escrow that there is a combination transaction, that the DPA transaction has its own escrow instructions, and that they need to submit those into our portal as soon as possible once they're signed, and that they understand they cannot and will not have the funds to disperse in less than 48 hours from them providing that acceptable package. Failure to do so will result in a delay, either failure to submit the package or failure to submit an acceptable package. Just like with the reservation, they will get a reject and any corrections that they need to make, but they will get a new 48-hour timeline. So hopefully you've gotten that, and we've gone through the phases, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? That is the 5 phases of funding. And as I said, there was +1 to get it done. The last one to get it done is you, the originating lender, are required to provide to U.S. Bank, the master servicer, a credit file or a collateral file, depending on how you refer to it. It's the full content of that transaction. We require you to also provide us a copy of that exact same file. So you don't have to do anything any different other than you would come here to our portal page, enter the consumer case information, and upload that credit file. Once you've done that, you're done with that transaction. I'm going to pause for a moment. We're going to look, see if there's any other questions. We will, again, kind of take a quick moment and go back through this because I always like to tell you what I'm going to tell you. Then I want to tell you. Then I want to tell you what I told you.
Okay. If the closing date is moved up, do we need a new funds request form?
No, you do not need a new funds request form if the closing date is moved up. However, something that does tie into that I want to be sure and draw to your attention. It is not acceptable to sign the DPA closing documents prior to the date of the document. So that's why you want to make your closing date or your signing date, I want to get that right, as soon as possible. Give you an example. Today's the 20th of the month. If I were making a reservation request today, I know that transaction is not signing until October. So I'm going to make my signing date October 1. We're going to draw docs today for October 1. Therefore, you have the entire month of October to sign those docs. You only need to ask for new docs if somehow you try to move it up to September, which isn't likely, or it falls back to November. But that's a great question. I appreciate you asking it. As we mentioned, our docs are only date sensitive to the month, and they should never be signed prior to the date on the document. What else you got, David?
Does the underwriter need to certify the borrower's income in the e-housing website for P2P?
What the underwriter does in the e-housing website is all in relationship to the underlying first mortgage, nothing to do with the DPA second. And I'm glad that question came because I want to point out to you something else we try and remind people of. And they'll say, oh, well, you know, right, this is the Tucson P2P or this is not the Tucson P2P. There is no separation. It's one program. The distinction is, where is your first mortgage coming from? If you're dealing with the PEMA Tucson IDA, then that's who you go to with questions and concerns regarding the first. If you're dealing with the AZ IDA, then that's who you go to with questions and concerns regarding the first. But when it comes to the second and the overall transaction, there is one pathway to purchase program. This is it. We drive the second mortgage. The second mortgage drives the overall transaction. What else you got there, David?
Okay, it says income count doesn't need to be signed by the underwriter. We've had a reject because the underwriter didn't sign it.
Great point on that. If the form calls for a signature, I don't care whose signature it is, then the form needs to be signed. If the form doesn't call for a signature, then there's no need for the form to be signed. That gets back into some of that we're talking about, right? Lending practices, you know, that's true with the documentation of the consumer. If there's a spot for the date, the form needs to be dated. That's all. So you're right. It doesn't call for the underwriter's signature. In fact, we don't even have a form. I'm glad you mentioned that. And somebody had given me a form from one of the MI companies, and they said, "Hey, why don't you use this?" And the issue with that is right. We have multiple lenders working this program. The moment we try and say to them, "Calculate income on this form this way," we start to run into stuff. So you have to calculate income in order to determine the consumer's eligibility. We simply ask for that calculation information. If the form you use has a place for a signature, sign it. You got anything else there?
It said we had a file and process for September and the funds runs out. We were told that we could not resubmit until after 4 p.m. on the 27th. Are we now able to submit for October today?
That's a good question, and the answer is no. But just to clarify, right? Once the funds are exhausted in a month, new submissions are only acceptable, and I'm glad you said that. I'm going to take you to the spot.
Yeah,
At the beginning of the following month. This is the message you as a participating lender would see if you log in now. The DP allocation for the month of September is exhausted. Therefore, please hold your submission requests until after 4 p.m. on Thursday, the 27th of September. Any request submitted prior to this date and time will be rejected without review. Thanks for your cooperation and participation. The reason is we don't build a waiting list, right? And so we're saying to you, at this point, it's going to get the next day review. The next day review will open up to the October allocation. And that's when you want to do it. And so we talked about, right, if you're right in that window and you miss, you want to make sure you are absolutely set up for that first day submission. That's what happened to us in the month of September. We were inundated with the first day of submission because of what wasn't able to be submitted the last week of the previous month. But no, keep that in mind. So don't submit until then. This message comes up every time you log in. Therefore, you are without excuse when you don't review or respond properly to the message. Any submissions, as it states here, we simply reject without review. I want to take you real quick back to the site page for the program. And I'm going to touch on some of these links that I didn't touch on before, but I just want you to see the information. So we did the application registration because we went there. The lender participation we mentioned to you there, and the document portal for the upload. So you can click on that link right here, and that takes you directly to that portal, which I showed you for the title company to give us the closing package and or for you to give us the credit package that you submit to US Bank. We looked at the link for eligible properties. When you get into lender documentations, there's a link for the program guides. It's posted there. A link for the step-by-step, which I've been referencing as we've spoken about the phases, 5 phases to funding plus 1. And so you'll see that. Remember, phase 1 encompasses steps 1 and 2. Phase 2 encompasses step number 3. Phase 3 encompasses step number 4. Phase 4 encompasses step number 5. Phase 5 encompasses steps 6 and 7. The plus 1 to get it done is the driver of 10. So you, the originating lender, provide us that collateral file. We looked at, I spoke about the job aids, and I'm going to pop this open. This is just a visual illustration of what I've been walking you through when we went through the live case. I mentioned to you the red boxes indicating where certain tabs are or indicating what information is required. You'll see that there. The funds request form, right, is populated based upon information on this doc data tab. You will see how to generate those documents right over here, clearly illustrated. You will see how it says that this system reservation request is required in order to secure a reservation of program funds. It is not a reservation. It's required to secure it. When you get the actual DPA document, then you have a reservation. You see where your case is there on the import. A point of interest, you can re-import your case if you've updated your loan origination information. It will overwrite what's already in our system. So no need to be concerned about that. Again, you see the red boxes that I mentioned, and inside those red boxes are information. Remember, this information is just for illustrative purposes. When you complete your system, it should be accurate and complete based upon that transaction. But again, and then it shows you how to generate that funds request form that you have to populate in order to put with the application documents and submit them for a request of a reservation. This outlines all those documents that we looked at. Here it just illustrates how to upload. Click the upload, pull it from your desktop, and then you will see the document reflected right here. I pointed out to you how to update the system. Click update, send to ADOA. That's how you complete that in order to submit that transaction. Once we've approved it, you will receive email notification and the case will change to pending closing because we would have approved that transaction. That document will be there uploaded into the system. I've illustrated for you the portal title must go to in order to give us the signed closing package, and you must go to in order to give us the credit file. When you do those things, you would have completed the 5 phases to funding plus 1 in order to be done. We're going to take a quick peek at the comments or questions here to make sure we got it all. What's that? Please move or mute for a second. Oh, let me see here. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, we're just going to touch on really briefly here, if you will, some of the common reasons for the rejection of this DOE package. We wanted to mention something to go along with that, right? Again, you are a professional lender. We are a professional lender. The guidelines and the instructions are posted for the purpose of you reviewing them in order to know what you're doing before you do it. Remember my earlier comment, begin with the end in mind. Get your understanding before you get your transaction. Develop your understanding before you work the case. And if you do that, you shouldn't have issues. But David's going to share with you some common reasons that we see for rejecting a request of a reservation.
Yeah, so there's 10 items that are required. There's the 5 initial disclosures, which you would download or from our site and get signed. And then there's a funds request form, and there's a couple other items, income calculation, the LP findings, education cert, things of that nature. The common things that we see is if the income on the LP is higher than the income calculation, we have no way of knowing that LP will take it with the lower income. So they need to line up.
And that's a great point. You see this income right here, and this is a declaration page which has a penalty of perjury. So when the consumer signs it, they're saying this is reflective of my income. When you generate an LP finding that has an income well beyond 10% of this, you're saying you're using something else. And that says to us, there's definitely a disconnect, and that is cause for rejection. What else?
Okay. Sometimes the county is not in the system, and so it's not going to migrate onto our form. And so if you see the county's missing, like it is on this form right here, that means that it's not in the system right, and that would be a reason why your DOE package would be rejected.
And again, remember, this declaration of eligibility is being signed by the consumer, and they're declaring that they're purchasing this property as a primary residence. They're declaring the eligibility of the property according to the program information, which speaks to the county, the city, and the zip code. So if that information is missing, they can't make that declaration properly. Anything else?
Yes, purchase contract is often either expired or missing.
And that's the last point we're going to make, and we're going to close. It's been about the hour, but that's really important, right? And these are things, again, that are basic to lending. If you submit a request of a reservation of funds with an expired contract, we say you don't have the ability to perform, therefore we reject it. If your contract is near expiration, we will issue the commitment because it's not expired. But you understand when it gets to the closing phase, you need an acceptable extension. Otherwise, you're not in a position to fund it. Same thing is true for you. And I think for the most part, people know it. Where we get a little lost is we start thinking everybody knows what has to be done, and therefore everybody concludes we will do it. We make no assumptions, and we seek to verify all information. So with that in mind, I hope you found this to be helpful. I will mention one last thing to you in closing. As I said earlier, back to the website, when we looked at the links, right? The job aid is there. The DOE instruction package is here. There is a sample promissory note and deed of trust here. And then when we schedule training, there are links here that people can do it. In this section, we will post this video so that you can review it again at your leisure and ensure your understanding of the process and the program so that success is inevitable for all involved. We thank you for your support and participation. We are here to help you as necessary. However, we do ask you do your part. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.